Hello, how are you? I'm going to talk about one of the Canterbury tales whose author is Geoffrey Chaucer, and the tale is called the Friar's Tale. Well, during this presentation, I will develop the following topics. They are a general background about the tale's teller and his personal characteristics. Then I will mention and describe the main characters of the tale. I will tell the tale. Then I will make an analysis about the story, giving many examples through different quotes. And finally, I will express many moral lessons related to the Friar's Tale. In relation to the background, it's important to know who was the friar. The man who is going to tell the tale is the friar. As it was learned when studying the general prologue, this man was called Hubert. He was part of the clergy, the group who worked for the church, and he belonged to the Christians. The story was told in the 14th century England when friars were supposed to be mendicants. They went out, preached to the people, and begged alongside the poor. In addition, he was able to administer the sacraments in his town, especially those of marriage and confession. Well, the friar dealt with high-class people such as rich landowners and noblemen, but he took advantage of these people and he cheated them to obtain something as reward. He also hung out with ladies and he enjoyed drinking alcohol. That is why he was considered a vicious man. And this image was the contrary to what was expected of a religious figure. Finally, he looked like a bull. As you can see in the picture. He was fat and bald, and he wore a bulky robe with a hood. This is the hood. And many crucifixes were hung around his enormous belly. The most important characters of the Friar's Tale were the summoner. He was a corrupt, deceitful, greedy, and evil man who carried the archdeacon's jobs. He collected people to go to the church and atone for their sins. And he was part of the ecclesiastical middle class. Then we have the yeoman. The yeoman was a dishonest man too. As it was known, he wore a green cloak and he was considered a forester. The yeoman wasn't actually a regular man. On the contrary, he was a fiend in the shape of a human being. But as a yeoman, he was part of the first class of peasantry. Then we can find a carter. He was a low social standing peasant whose cart was stuck in the mud. And finally, the widow. She was an old woman whose husband died. She was an innocent and honest. And finally, she owned goods and she had many pens. Well, in the prologue of the tale, the friar said that he would tell a funny story about a lecher summoner. This situation sparked a conflict with the summoner who was present. So the friar told him that he didn't wish to offend him. The summoner didn't object, but he promised to pay him back later with a story about a friar. The host, who was present, told the friar to go on telling his tale. The story goes thus. There was an archdeacon who was eager and effective in carrying out punishment for crimes against the church, such as witchcraft, defamation, adultery, and usury. However, the archdeacon hated lechery. This archdeacon had a summoner who was very good at finding lechers, as she was quite immoral himself. And the summoner had a group of spies working for him to find prostitutes and force them to tell the spies who their clients were. And in return, women wouldn't be punished. One day, the summoner met a yeoman near the forest. Well, the summoner introduced himself as a bailiff, as he was ashamed of his real profession, and the yeoman said that he was a bailiff too. Based on their shared occupation, they swore brotherhood to their dying day. And then the summoner asked the yeoman about himself. The yeoman said that he had to extort money from people to make a living, and the summoner agreed he must do the same. Then, after that, the yeoman revealed that he was a fiend who had chosen to appear in a human shape. And well, the summoner approved and accepted that situation, and their partnership stood. Both of them found a farmer with a cart stuck in the mud. The farmer, frustrated, said, "The devil take all." And of course, the summoner thought that this meant that the fiend could take all the man's belongings, the cart, the hay, and the 3 horses. But the fiend expressed that the farmer didn't mean the words. Finally, the farmer could move his cart forward, and he congratulated his horses in the name of God. Then the yeoman and the summoner traveled toward the city and toward the town, and the summoner knocked on the house of the widow. And the summoner lied to the widow, to the woman, telling that there was a charge against her, and the charge was about adultery, but if she paid him, she wouldn't have to answer for it. On the contrary, she would be excommunicated. The woman replied that she didn't have enough money, and the summoner persisted in harassing her, asking for a pan as a profit in exchange of an old debt. Because of that, the widow cursed him, asking the devil to come and carry him and her pan off to the hell as well. The fiend asked the old woman if she was sincere, and she said she was. So the devil took the summoner and the pan off to the hell, the place reserved to all summoners. Finally, in the epilogue, the friar ended the tale by telling summoners to repent or to go to hell. If we make an analysis about the tale, we can find different relationships among characters and different topics. For example, in the first place, we can find the relationship between the friar and the summoner. Both of them represented men of the church who used their position for profit. In the prologue, the friar degraded summoners, and the friar said that summoners were generally hated. A quotation that represents this bad relation says, "A summoner is not much to be commended. I hope that none of you will be offended." In the body of the tale, it can be seen that summoners weren't over the jurisdiction of friars. A quotation that exemplifies this says, "Our summoner here, he has no jurisdiction on friars, and he cannot make infliction upon us, now or ever, or takes dues from friars." Then we have the relationship between the summoner and the yeoman, or the fiend. Both of them swore brotherhood, and they still keep this relationship even after the summoner knew the yeoman's true nature, that the yeoman was a fiend. The quotation that represents this brotherhood says, "I will hold my engagement on the level, though you were Satan's self, the very devil. I keep my word of honor to a brother as I have sworn." And then we have the irony of the friar's tale, that it can be a double irony, because the friar discredited summoners, and in the process, he discredited himself. Although the friar's methods of extracting money from people were more charming than the summoner's one, the friar predicted unwittingly not predicted, he preached unwittingly against himself. Then we have the summoner's sentence. Avarice, bribery, extortion, and greed are the central topics of this tale, but also they are crimes in which or for which the summoner was sentenced. Also, the lack of moral took the summoner to the hell. There is a quotation that exemplified these kind of crimes. "He knew so much of bribery and blackmail. There is no sporting dog that's more expert than this summoner who could spot for sure lecher, adulterer, or paramour." And finally, we can find the corruption of the church that can be seen through people who belong or who worked for it. In this case, the summoner who worked for the church was as corrupt as the friar, who is the man who told the tale. The moral lessons that can be seen in this tale can be, one of them is, one must be pious and as well as on the alert for the wiles of the devil. And this lesson can be seen in the epilogue when it says, "Watch therefore and pray Jesus of his grace to keep us out of that accursed place and word of Satan, tempting us from glory." And the other one says, "The friar warned the listeners to be careful of what they wish for and to think before speaking." And this part called my attention because I think that is a good advice for our daily lives, to think before speak. Because if we speak without thinking, it might be late and you cannot go back. So take this into account. First, think, and then speak. Well, there are many of the consulted material, the sources. And of course, thank you for watching and listening.